Nobody expected it to feel this real. Not this soon. Not this sharp. And certainly not with Checo Pérez behind the wheel, smiling like that. But what happened at Silverstone wasn't just a car launch. It was a statement. A black, all-new Cadillac F1 car, sliding through the wet British circuit, with a Mexican driver leading the charge, of what could become America's most serious Formula One effort since the sport began. And what Perez said right after stepping out of the car. It wasn't just surprising. It revealed a shift no one was ready for. Not Red Bull. Not the FIA. Not even the fans watching from the pit wall. Because what Cadillac just unlocked might change the 2026 grid completely. And this is only the beginning. It was cold. It was wet. It was Silverstone. But none of that mattered. Because as Cadillac's all-black prototype pulled out of the garage, nobody was watching the weather. They were watching history. This wasn't just a shakedown. It wasn't a marketing stunt. It was a real car. On a real circuit. Driven by a Grand Prix winner. With real feedback, real data, and real intent. Checo Pérez stepping into the cockpit wasn't a cameo. It was calculated. Because if this project is going to work, it needs credibility. It needs experience. It needs someone who knows what a championship car is supposed to feel like, and can call it out when it isn't. And that's why what he said next matters. He didn't give the usual sponsor-friendly praise. He didn't say interesting or positive signs. He said the car felt incredible. That word carries weight, especially when it comes from a driver who's spent years inside Red Bull's garage. A driver who knows what elite machinery feels like, and knows what's missing when it isn't there. But here's what makes it more than just a compliment. This wasn't just Cadillac showing up. It was Cadillac belonging. From the way the car handled low-speed traction in the wet, to how quickly it got through balance checks on intermediate tires, to how much confidence Perez had pushing into Sector 2 at half power. Something clicked. And for the first time since Andretti's name started circling the headlines, Cadillac didn't look like an outsider. They looked like they were already part of the grid. And that changes everything. What's surprising isn't that Cadillac got the car on track. It's how much of it was already working. Because according to internal reports, and subtle confirmations from Perez himself, this wasn't a basic installation test. This was a systems validation run. And what they tested ran clean. No major electrical faults. No ERS sync delays. No brake-by-wire calibration problems, not even in the wet. And that last part? That's huge. Because Formula One cars, especially in early builds, hate low-speed corners in cold conditions. The regen settings, the torque response, the tire loading, it all gets scrambled. Most teams spend weeks trying to stabilize hybrid deployment in the rain. But Cadillac? They hit install and drove. And while nobody's claiming the car is fast, not yet, the underlying behavior shocked more than one observer in the paddock. This is the part teams don't want to admit publicly. They expected Cadillac to struggle with integration. Not the chassis. Not the aero. The hybrid electric systems. Why? Because the 2026 regulations are brutal. Smaller internal combustion engines. 3 times more energy recovery. Tighter packaging. More cooling sensitivity. And zero tolerance for sloppy deployment logic. And yet, on a wet day, in unfamiliar conditions, with a prototype powertrain built outside the usual supplier circles, Cadillac's system ran smoothly enough for Perez to say one word that hit differently. Ready. He didn't mean race ready. He meant structurally sound. And that's where people inside the sport started to realize. This team might not just be arriving. They might already be catching up. On the surface, Cadillac's debut looks like a win for the brand. A clean run. A credible driver. A solid prototype. Exactly what you'd expect from a manufacturer with something to prove. But beneath the trackside photos, there's a deeper shift happening. Because what's now becoming clear, especially to rival teams, is that Cadillac didn't do this alone. Yes, the car carries their badge. Yes, it runs out of the Andretti base in the US. But key components? Key software? Key integration logic? It's coming from people who've already been on the F1 grid. Insiders are now pointing to a quiet recruitment effort. That started almost 2 years ago. Engineers from Mercedes' HPP division. Software specialists from Mahindra's electric program. Even simulation technicians who formerly worked under Renault's chassis group. They're not being announced. They're not being posted on LinkedIn. But they're there, in the background, building a system that feels a lot more mature than anyone thought Cadillac could pull off alone. And that's the twist. This isn't just a flashy debut. It's the product of a very deliberate, very European, F1 style recruitment model, hidden behind an American badge. It's why the car behaved properly at Silverstone. Why the electronics didn't glitch in the wet. Why Perez looked calm instead of cautious. Because Cadillac's not starting from scratch. They've imported knowledge. They've bought experience. And now, teams that thought this project would take 5 years to stabilize are realizing it might be stable already. That changes everything. Because now, the debate isn't whether Cadillac can build a car. It's whether the FIA will even be able to say no to a project that's suddenly looking more F1 ready than some teams already on the grid. And the moment that question comes up, it stops being technical. And it becomes political. There's a reason no one on the current F1 grid celebrated Cadillac's debut. Not Ferrari. Not Mercedes. Not Red Bull. Because what happened at Silverstone wasn't just technical validation. It was a threat. A threat to the unspoken balance that's held the current 10 teams in place for years. A structure that says, we're full. We don't need more. But here's the part no one is admitting publicly. Cadillac's clean run, in regulation spec, with top-tier driver feedback, just made that argument harder to defend. This isn't a fictional team. It's not an underfunded startup. It's a fully resourced project, backed by General Motors, delivering a prototype that didn't collapse on lap 1. And that's the problem. Because now the question isn't can Cadillac join? It's, what excuse is left to stop them? The objections so far have been predictable. Will they bring value? Will they be competitive? Do they understand how complex F1 really is? But here's what the Silverstone run just exposed. They do. They are. And the only thing standing in their way now is politics. Because the top teams aren't worried Cadillac will embarrass themselves. They're worried Cadillac won't. They're worried Cadillac will take points, take prize money, take drivers, take influence. And that's why the silence after the debut spoke louder than any press release. You didn't hear praise. You didn't hear welcome. You heard strategy. Suddenly, there are new whispers from the paddock. That maybe 11 teams is too many. That maybe the calendar can't support expansion. That maybe this isn't the right time for another American project. But no one's saying it directly. Because if they do, they'll have to explain something even harder. Why a fully funded, technically competent, manufacturer-backed entry should be left out of the sport, while others who've been struggling for a decade get to keep their seats at the table. Let's be clear. If this Silverstone test had gone badly, Cadillac would be forgotten by now. A few blurry photos, a short press release, some recycled commentary about how hard F1 really is. And that would be it. But that's not what happened. What happened is a prototype rolled out of the garage, with systems functioning, feedback flowing, and one of F1's most experienced drivers stepping out of the cockpit, calling the car incredible. That changes the timeline. And it changes the tone. Because now, this isn't a debate about if Cadillac can build a car. It's about how soon they can be on the grid. And that shift in narrative? It forces people to take positions. For the FIA, it creates a new urgency. They've been cautious, deliberate, waiting to see if Cadillac was serious, if Andretti's infrastructure could evolve, if this project would survive past the announcement phase. Now they have their answer. And every month they delay a decision from this point forward. Every month the grid resists expansion, starts to look less like governance, and more like protectionism. Because here's what happens next. Cadillac keeps testing. Andretti keeps building. Data keeps flowing. And eventually, they'll show up at a public test, with lap times that can't be ignored. And when that happens, it forces the hand. Because if Cadillac is within a second of the midfield in simulation, if their systems prove reliable under FIA supervision, and if a factory-backed engine program comes online by 2026, there's no excuse left. Not financial, not sporting, not structural. And that's what the current teams are trying to prevent. A scenario where rejection becomes indefensible. Because if Cadillac walks in and scores points in year 1, if they attract sponsors, sign talent, and become credible fast, they don't just enter Formula 1. They reshape it. They challenge the status quo. They pressure underperforming teams. They split the TV narrative. They draw in a new fan base. And they prove that F1 can be open, if the politics get out of the way. That's the real impact. And it's coming faster than anyone expected. So here we are. A cold morning in Silverstone. A black car on wet tires. A driver stepping out of the cockpit smiling, not because he was surprised, but because he wasn't. Checo Pérez didn't walk away from that test politely. He walked away impressed. And in doing so, he sent a ripple through the paddock louder than any press release ever could. Because now everyone, from team principals to race directors, knows what this really is. It's not just a shakedown. It's a warning. Cadillac is no longer interested. They're here. They've shown capability. They've shown structure. They've shown restraint. And soon, they may start showing pace. So what happens next? Do the FIA fast-track a decision? Do the teams double down on their resistance? Does Cadillac keep testing in silence until someone forces the issue? Or do we reach a point where the sport has to choose between its own future and the protection of the past? Because make no mistake, this isn't about one team anymore. It's about the walls around Formula One, and whether they're built to protect excellence, or just to keep new players out. What Cadillac did at Silverstone wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was simple. They showed up, and they ran clean. And now, everyone else has a problem. Because if the FIA lets this team in, some people will lose power. And if they don't, they'll have to explain why the fastest growing market in motorsport, the most well-funded new entrant in years, and a driver like Checo Perez, is being kept outside the gate.